I've never been one to believe in clichés like love at first sight. They always seem too neat, too implausible, like something out of a movie script rather than real life. But then I saw her for the first time standing at the front of the conference room, and suddenly I wasn't so sure. Natalie was the new hire at the office, and from the moment she walked in, she commanded the space without even trying. Her presence was magnetic. She had these piercing blue eyes that seemed to notice everything, and when she laughed, a light, effortless sound, it felt as though the entire room leaned in to hear it. She carried herself with a confidence that wasn't overbearing but natural, as if she belonged wherever she chose to be. I tried to keep my distance at first. After all, she was the new girl, and I didn't want to be the one to blur lines or complicate things. Work relationships, no matter how casual, came with risks, and I wasn't the type to court unnecessary drama. But Natalie, she had this way of breaking through walls I didn't even realize I had built. It started small, quick exchanges in the break room or a shared laugh over an awkward team meeting. Soon, those moments stretched into longer conversations, first about work and then about everything else. She had a knack for turning mundane topics into something exciting, as if the world itself was brighter through her perspective. Before I knew it, we were having lunch together almost every day, our inside jokes multiplying faster than I could keep track. And then there were the messages. What started as harmless questions about schedules or projects gradually evolved into casual texts after work. Pictures of her dog, recommendations for restaurants, or memes that made her think of me. I found myself smiling at my phone more often than I'd like to admit, waiting for the next ping to light up the screen. The day she suggested a movie night at my apartment, it caught me off guard. It was such a simple offer, posed casually during one of our lunchtime chats. I feel like we'd have fun picking apart bad movies, she'd said, her smile teasing but warm. What do you think? Friday night? I should have said no. I should have made up an excuse or reminded her that colleagues weren't supposed to cross that line. But instead I found myself nodding, my heart racing at the thought. Yeah, I said, trying to sound as calm as she looked. That sounds fun. But deep down I knew it wasn't just a casual suggestion. There was something unspoken in the way she'd looked at me, something in the ease with which she invited herself into my space. I told myself it was innocent, just two friends hanging out. But my pulse quickened every time I thought about it, a nervous anticipation building in my chest. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Every interaction with Natalie felt charged, even though nothing had really changed. She was the same as ever, bright, funny, effortlessly charming, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. It was in the way her gaze lingered a little longer than necessary, or the way her laughter felt just a touch softer when she was talking to me. By the time Friday rolled around, I was a mess of nerves. I spent more time than I'd like to admit cleaning my apartment, obsessing over details I knew she probably wouldn't even notice. I told myself I was being ridiculous. This wasn't a date, just a friendly night in, but my heart refused to listen. As the clock ticked closer to her arrival, I found myself second-guessing everything. What if I was reading too much into this? What if she really did just see me as a friend? I tried to shake the thoughts away, but they clung to me, a quiet hum of doubt that wouldn't let go. Then the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there she was, holding a bottle of wine in one hand and wearing that easy, radiant smile that made my stomach flip. "Hope I'm not too early," she said, stepping inside as if she'd been here 100 times before. "Not at all," I replied, closing the door behind her and hoping she didn't notice the slight tremor in my voice. She handed me the wine, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest second, and the contact sent a jolt through me that I quickly tried to suppress. "I figured this might go well with whatever disaster of a movie we end up watching," she said with a laugh, her tone light, but her eyes lingered just a little too long. "Good choice," I said, leading her to the living room and trying to appear nonchalant. My hands felt clammy, and I resisted the urge to wipe them on my jeans as I gestured to the couch. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll grab glasses." When I returned, she was already lounging on the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her and her phone in her hand. She looked up as I entered, her smile softening into something almost tender. "You have a nice place," she said, accepting the glass of wine I handed her. "Thanks," I said, sitting down beside her. Not too close, but not too far either. The space between us felt charged, like it was waiting for something to happen. We picked a movie, something forgettable and ridiculous, and the night unfolded easily, laughter spilling between us as we made sarcastic comments and toasted to the absurdity of it all. But beneath the humor, beneath the casual banter, there was a tension I couldn't ignore. Every time our shoulders brushed or our hands accidentally grazed while reaching for the remote, my heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining it. But as the night wore on, as the wine flowed and the distance between us shrank, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Natalie arrived at my door with a bottle of wine in her hand and a smile that felt like it could light up the whole city. The moment I opened the door, the air between us seemed to shift, crackling with a kind of energy I couldn't explain. She was dressed casually, jeans, a fitted sweater. But there was something about the way she carried herself, that effortless confidence that made it hard to look away. "Hope I didn't pick the wrong wine," she said with a laugh, holding the bottle up like a peace offering. Her voice was light, but her eyes held mine for just a second too long, enough to send my heart racing. "Looks perfect," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. My voice felt steady, but inside I was a whirlwind of nerves. "Come on in." She walked past me and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, soft and floral. It lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a spell. I closed the door and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was Natalie, funny, charming, completely out of my league Natalie, and somehow she was here standing in my living room like she belonged. "Nice place," she said, glancing around. She set the wine on the counter and turned to face me, her hands in her pockets. "Very you." I laughed softly, unsure of what she meant but grateful for the compliment. "Thanks. Make yourself comfortable." We decided on Japanese food to go with the wine, debating over the menu like it was the most important decision in the world. She had a way of turning even the simplest conversations into something fun, her laughter filling the room and putting me at ease. When the food finally arrived, we spread it out on the coffee table and settled on the couch, side by side, the wine flowing as easily as our conversation. It was always like this with her. Effortless. Every story she told seemed to pull me in, her words painting vivid pictures that made me laugh or think, or sometimes both at once. She had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered in that moment, like her attention was a spotlight and I was standing center stage. As the night wore on, the movie we'd put on faded into the background, a collection of moving images and muffled dialogue neither of us was paying attention to. Our laughter filled the space between us, mingling with the clink of wine glasses and the occasional rustle of takeout containers. But then there was a pause. It happened so subtly that I almost didn't notice it at first. The laughter faded, the easy flow of conversation stilled, and suddenly the room felt quieter than it had all night. I glanced at Natalie and she was already looking at me, her blue eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "You're always so hard to read," she said, her voice soft but steady. There was a small smile on her lips, but something deeper lurked beneath it, something serious. "Hard to read." I repeated, my own voice quieter now. The warmth of the wine, the weight of her gaze, it all made it harder to think straight. "Yeah," she said, leaning back slightly, her head tilting as she studied me. "Like you're holding something back. Like you're afraid to let me get too close." Her words hit like a gentle blow, not cruel but probing, peeling back layers I hadn't even realized I was hiding behind. I felt the heat rising to my cheeks and I looked away, focusing on the empty glass in my hand. "I'm not," I started, but the words felt hollow even to me. "You are," she interrupted gently, and when I glanced back at her, she was smiling again, but softer this time, almost tender. "It's okay. I'm just trying to figure you out." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could I say? That she was right? That she had a way of getting under my skin, of making me feel seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying? The silence stretched and I felt the weight of her gaze, steady and unwavering. And then she moved. It was subtle at first, a slight shift closer, her knee brushing against mine. But then her hand reached out, resting lightly on top of mine. The touch was soft, barely there, but it sent a jolt through me like a current, igniting something deep inside. My breath caught and I looked down at where her hand covered mine, her skin warm against mine. "Natalie," I murmured, unsure of where I was going with it, unsure of what I was trying to say. She didn't move, didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled slightly, anchoring me there, her touch both grounding and electric. "If I'm reading this wrong," she said softly, her voice steady but her eyes searching mine, "tell me now." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I should have hesitated. I should have pulled away. But instead I met her gaze, the walls I'd been holding up for so long crumbling under the weight of her sincerity. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed there, letting her hand rest on mine, letting the moment stretch and shift until it became something else entirely. Natalie. Her name escaped my lips as a whisper, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I tried to string together a sentence, something logical to cut through the thick tension building between us, but the words failed me. They slipped away, leaving me vulnerable and exposed under her steady gaze. She smiled, a soft curve of her lips that wasn't teasing but understanding, like she knew exactly what I was trying and failing to say. It wasn't smug or overconfident. It was simply her, reading me with an ease that was both comforting and disarming. "If I'm reading this wrong, tell me now," she said, her voice steady but soft, her blue eyes holding mine without flinching. Her words hung in the air, offering me an out, a chance to step back and draw a line in the sand. But instead of grasping for logic, instead of finding my footing in the chaos of my thoughts, I leaned forward, driven by something I couldn't name. I closed the space between us, and before I could second-guess myself, my lips brushed hers. The kiss was tentative at first, as if we were both testing the waters. But the hesitation didn't last long. The moment she kissed me back, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her hand slid to my cheek, her touch firm and grounding, and the kiss deepened into something more desperate, more urgent, as though all the tension between us had finally found its breaking point. I didn't know how it happened, but somehow we shifted, our movements fluid and instinctive. My fingers found the hem of her sweater, tugging it upward without thinking, and she didn't hesitate to help me remove it, tossing it aside like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her hands moved with equal certainty, pulling at my shirt, and before I knew it, the fabric joined hers in a forgotten pile on the floor. Every touch, every movement felt electric, like my skin was alive in a way it had never been before. She leaned into me, her lips tracing a path from my mouth to my jaw, and I couldn't hold back the small gasp that escaped. Her fingers were gentle but deliberate, trailing down my arms, over my back, mapping me out as though she wanted to memorize every inch. "Natalie," I murmured again, her name barely coherent as her hands found my waist, pulling me closer. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her gaze heavy-lidded but still focused, as if she were trying to read my every thought. "I want you," she whispered, her voice low and thick with something I could only describe as need. "All of you." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and I nodded, unable to form a coherent response. The way she looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered, made it impossible to do anything but give in. Time lost meaning as we moved together, her hands and lips exploring with a kind of reverence that left me breathless. It wasn't rushed or frantic, but deliberate, as though we both wanted to savor every moment. The way her body responded to mine, the way her breath hitched with every touch, every kiss, it was intoxicating. And when she whispered my name, low and urgent, it sent a jolt through me that left me trembling. I don't know how long we stayed like that, tangled together on the couch, completely consumed by each other. Hours could have passed, or maybe only minutes. All I knew was that the world outside had ceased to exist. There was only her warmth, her touch, her presence. Eventually, when the intensity began to ebb, we found ourselves lying side by side, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. The room was quiet, save for the sound of our breathing, and the air between us was thick with unspoken words. My hand traced absent-minded patterns on her arm, and I felt her shift slightly, her fingers brushing against mine. "We need to talk about this," I said finally, my voice soft but uncertain. The words felt heavy in my chest, but I knew they needed to be said. "About what this means. About work." She lifted her head to look at me, her expression calm but serious. "Okay," she said simply, her voice steady. "Let's talk." I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't want to ruin anything," I confessed, my voice barely audible. "I don't want to ruin us or make things complicated." Her lips curved into a small smile, and she reached up to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Then don't," she said, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "We're adults. We can figure it out." Her confidence should have been reassuring, but my chest still felt tight with uncertainty. "But what if?" She cut me off, leaning in to press a gentle kiss to my lips, silencing my doubt. When she pulled back, she was smiling again, softer this time. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," she said. "Let's just be. Okay?" I nodded slowly, her words sinking in. She made it sound so simple, so easy, and maybe it could be. For now, at least, I wanted to believe it could be. The rest of the night passed in quiet conversation, our words soft and tentative as we navigated this new territory. And though the questions and doubts still lingered at the edges of my mind, they felt distant in the warmth of her presence, in the quiet certainty of her smile. The first rays of sunlight crept into the room, casting a soft golden glow across the apartment. The quiet was serene, almost deceptively so, given the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I glanced down at Natalie, her head resting on my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. She looked peaceful, her features relaxed in the kind of calm that seemed almost unattainable for me right now. I wanted to stay in that moment forever, to preserve the way her presence felt, warm, grounding, and inexplicably right. But I couldn't ignore the weight pressing on my chest, the reality of what had just happened between us. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" I murmured, breaking the silence. My voice wavered, barely above a whisper, but it was enough to rouse her. Natalie stirred slightly, tilting her head to look up at me. Her blue eyes, still soft with sleep, met mine, and for a moment I thought she might avoid the question. Instead, her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Only if you wanted to," she said simply, her voice quiet but steady. Her response caught me off guard. I'd expected complications, an avalanche of worries and what-ifs, but Natalie had a way of simplifying things, of stripping away the noise and focusing on what really mattered. He always had. Her fingers moved lightly, finding mine and intertwining them with an ease that sent a warmth through me. It wasn't just the gesture, it was the quiet confidence in it, the way she seemed so sure of this, of us, even as doubt threatened to consume me. I let out a shaky breath, leaning my head back against the couch and staring up at the ceiling. "I'm just scared," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "This feels so big and I don't know what happens next." Natalie shifted, sitting up slightly so she could face me. Her expression softened, her hand still holding mine. "It's okay to be scared," she said. "I'm scared too. But that doesn't mean we can't figure it out." Her words settled over me like a balm, soothing some of the chaos inside. She made it sound so simple, like we weren't standing on the edge of something that could either be incredible or catastrophic. I envied her calm, but more than that, I admired it. "You make it sound so easy," I said, glancing at her with a faint smile. She chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's not. But I think it's worth it." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard, and for a moment I couldn't look away. He was right, of course she was. But taking that leap, letting myself believe in the possibility of something more, felt terrifying in a way I wasn't sure I could explain. "I don't want to mess this up," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "You won't," she replied without hesitation. "We won't." Her certainty should have felt overwhelming, but instead it grounded me. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. For now that was enough. When she finally stood to leave, the sun had fully risen, bathing the room in a warm light that felt almost symbolic. I walked her to the door, still clutching her hand, reluctant to let her go. She turned to me before stepping out, her smile soft but full of promise. "I'll see you tonight?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes betraying the deeper meaning behind the question. I nodded, unable to suppress the smile spreading across my face. "Tonight," I confirmed. With that, she leaned in, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek before disappearing down the hallway. I stood there for a moment after she left, the quiet of the apartment settling around me. It felt different now, not empty but full of something I couldn't quite name. Hope maybe. Anticipation. The days that followed were a strange mix of exhilaration and uncertainty. At work, we exchanged glances that lingered too long and shared smiles that carried secrets only we understood. It was like we existed in our own little world, separate from the one around us. Outside of work, things were even more surreal. Natalie was unapologetically herself, bold, open, and completely disarming. She drew me out of my shell in ways I hadn't expected, making me laugh until my sides hurt and challenging me to see parts of myself I'd long ignored. She had this way of making everything feel lighter, like taking risks wasn't so scary when she was there to share them. One night, as we sat together on my couch again, her head resting against my shoulder, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit before. I wasn't just scared of the risks or the complications. I was scared of how much I wanted this, how much I wanted her. But for the first time I was willing to embrace the fear, to let it propel me forward instead of holding me back. Natalie glanced up at me, her smile soft and knowing. "You're thinking too much again," she teased gently. I laughed, shaking my head. "Maybe. But it's hard not to with you around." She grinned, leaning closer. "Good. I like keeping you on your toes." And just like that, the fear faded, replaced by the warmth of her presence and the quiet certainty that whatever happened next, we'd figure it out together. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace the unknown.